Hello friends, it's me. Are you ready to meet the most famous woman in the world? Maybe you know her story already. Maybe you've seen her in a movie. This is Cleopatra. The year is 69 BC. Cleopatra is 14 years old. Where does she live? In the royal palace at Alexandria. They show us a young woman with an elegant nose, almond eyes, and curly hair. In those days, it was forbidden for women to be pharaohs. And when those advisors insulted her dignity, she decided to fight back. She wandered through the desert for months until she found a small oasis. There she met some Bedouin tribesmen. They were tough and proud people, fierce fighters and loyal friends. Cleopatra spent some time with them. It sounds unbelievable, but it's true. Cleopatra was at war with her own family. Fortunately, the Roman Senate supported her. They sent troops to restore order in Egypt. One of the military leaders was Julius Caesar. He arrived in Alexandria and ended the civil war. Then he went to see Cleopatra. Together, they toured the city. They visited the library and talked with scholars. They also went down the river in a boat. That's where they fell in love. But you can't imagine how angry the Egyptians were. They hated Romans. And now their queen left the city and went to Rome. Was she crazy? Not at all. She gave birth to Caesar's son and became the most famous woman in the world. She got everything she ever wanted. Power, luxury, love, and a chance to change the world. She learned their ways and their language. She learned to ride a camel and shoot a bow. She also made some valuable contacts. Years later, when she returned to Alexandria, those Bedouin tribesmen were still there waiting for her. They helped her to take the throne back. She escaped from the palace. She left Alexandria and went deep into the Egyptian desert. Soon, he would need Egypt's gold and its location. The Ptolemies weren't ready for that. They continued to fight against each other. They didn't realize what was going on in the world. Tom was dead. Now Cleopatra ruled Egypt alone. But her younger siblings were still alive. They were hiding somewhere in the desert, probably waiting for their chance to get back the throne. Also, Rome was getting closer. And every day Cleopatra thought about what to do next. Should she keep fighting? Should she surrender to Rome? Or maybe she should find another solution. One day, she decided to visit her old friend, Syrian. He was the ambassador of Rome. He remembered Cleopatra from her childhood. Back then, she was just a little girl who loved to ask questions. Now she was a young woman with experience and knowledge. She had wisdom in her eyes. Syria realized that Cleopatra wasn't like other Egyptian princesses. She was smarter than any man in the kingdom. Syria was surprised by her skills and knowledge, but he wasn't the only one. You see, Cleopatra wrote a letter to the Roman Senate. She invited them to name her the Queen of Egypt. That's exactly what they did. In 51 BC, Cleopatra became the official ruler of Egypt. For the first time in history, a woman became a pharaoh all by herself. It was dangerous, but Cleopatra didn't care. She walked barefoot in the burning sun. She didn't want to be the Queen of Egypt anymore. She wanted to leave the kingdom forever. When her servants met her on the road, they couldn't believe their eyes. They thought that Cleopatra was mad. What would she do now? How could she survive alone in the desert? Little did they know that Cleopatra had a plan. So Cleopatra had to marry and find a male ruler. But which groom would be good enough for her? Her own father was a coward. He hid in his palace instead of ruling like a man. And what kind of husband would he choose for his daughter? A man like him, afraid of everything? No, Cleopatra dreamed of a real leader, a strong and brave man. Could she find such a man in Egypt? Probably not. So she looked beyond her kingdom. She sent messengers to Greece, to Rome, and to many other lands. She invited eligible bachelors to compete for her hand. Who were these men? Princes and generals, nobles and scholars. All of them wanted to be the king of Egypt. Cleopatra wanted to be proud of her husband, but none of the applicants met her standards. And then a terrible thing happened. When Cleopatra turned 18, her father's advisors declared her unfit to be a queen. They said that she needed a guardian who could protect her and rule in her place. Of course, her younger brother, Tom. He was just 10 years old. To make things worse, those advisors forced Cleopatra to marry her little brother. It sounds insane, doesn't it? It was actually quite common in those days. Royal families often married their children to each other. It's disgusting to us, but for the Ptolemies, it was normal. By the way, Cleopatra wasn't the only one to blame. Those advisors encouraged the marriage. They wanted to rule in Tom's name. They hoped that Cleopatra would become a figurehead. She wouldn't be able to do anything. Oh, they were wrong. Was she beautiful? You decide for yourself. Did Cleopatra have any brothers or sisters? Yes, she had a younger brother. His name was Ptolemy the 13th. Let's call him Tom. Unlike Cleopatra, he liked to play with toys rather than books. He preferred horses to history, but Tom wasn't to blame. Their father was King Ptolemy the 12th. He was afraid of everything and everyone. Especially he was afraid of Rome. At that time, Rome was becoming more and more powerful. The king feared that Romans would take Egypt's gold and its freedom, so he kept his people away from the outside world. He closed the borders, he didn't let anyone leave. Egypt became an island. As a result, the royal children didn't know much about the world. They knew nothing about Rome. They didn't even know how to swim. Can you imagine it? These two kids grew up without knowing what the sea was. It's one of the largest palaces in the ancient world. Look at these beautiful gardens. That's where Cleopatra lives with her family. They are the Ptolemies. They rule the land in the name of Egypt's gods, but the Ptolemies are not Egyptians. They come from Greece. Many years ago, a general of Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. After him, his helpers ruled the kingdom. Then came the Ptolemies. Now they are the royal family. But Cleopatra wants to be more than just a princess. We're going to tell you about her amazing life. So let's go back in time. Let's travel to a kingdom far away. Long ago, this kingdom was rich and powerful. People called it Egypt. What did Cleopatra look like? Well, we don't know. There are no portraits of her. Only pictures of her coins. What do they show us? When Cleopatra was 14, her father died. According to the law, she could now become the new ruler. But who was supposed to rule with her? What kind of a woman was Cleopatra? She was intelligent, ambitious, and very proud. She hated injustice. So who helped her? Herself. She was no longer the naive girl who needed protection. She was a woman who could take care of herself, and she did. Meanwhile, across the sea, Rome was changing. The Roman Republic was becoming an empire. Julius Caesar was gaining power. He wanted to conquer the whole Mediterranean. But why did she need Rome's approval? Well, because Egypt was at war. Her siblings were fighting to take the throne. They even asked Syrian for help. You've been listening to short stories. See you soon. When Julius Caesar came to Egypt, he was welcomed by a red carpet entrance and a long line of rulers. There was the king, Ptolemy the 13th, his mother, Cleopatra the 7th, and a bunch of other Cleopatras, and to help untangle this mess. Now, when you think of Cleopatra, you probably think of her as being the last pharaoh of Egypt. Well, that's actually not true because there were two more official rulers after her. The first one being her own son, but perhaps we can talk about him later. For now, let's focus on her father's side of the family. Here's everything you need to know about Egypt's royal family tree. The story goes that one day, Ptolemy was taking a relaxing dip in his bathtub when suddenly he noticed the reflection of a small fly floating on the surface of the water. And if you're thinking, why would they kill their king? Just remember, throughout history, it has never been hard to find people willing to betray their leaders. Perhaps they hoped that if they showed Caesar how violent the young king could be, He would understand that dealing with the royal court would be difficult and cut his losses. She had to come up with a way to win back her kingdom. What she lacked in resources, she made up for in confidence. Conceiving a plan, she had a carpet woven as a present for him, very costly and adorned with gold. If you are surprised by my sudden appearance, I cannot blame you, for I knew your camp was well guarded, and I ran such risks as I thought necessary to see you again. While Plutarch believed that Caesar only did this to make the Egyptians happy, others argued that Caesar was enamored by Cleopatra, seeing her as a worthy equal and partner for his young son, whom he also planned to make co-regent. When they heard that Cleopatra and Caesar had seized the capital, they decided to fight back. Soon, the streets of Alexandria turned into a battleground. Caesar's forces clashed with Ptolemy's loyalists. The fighting was fierce, lasting 10 days, and ultimately ending with the great library of Alexandria being set ablaze. The loss of this important center of learning is often exaggerated. She wanted to be the most powerful woman in the world. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it. It really helps us grow. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And for that, she needed to be free of Rome, but it was certainly a blow to the ancient world, causing many priceless scrolls to be destroyed. Then, according to Plutarch, Caesar asked her where his spies had been, to which she replied, "Where are your guards?" According to Plutarch, Cleopatra nursed him back to health, which only deepened his feelings for her. Together, they celebrated their victory, drinking freely. The historian Suetonius wrote that Caesar was especially fond of wine from the Egyptian city of Arabia, drinking so much that he regularly urinated blood. Either way, the two quickly fell in love, much to the dismay of Caesar's friend and advisor, the Roman general Mark Antony, who wrote to him, according to Plutarch, during their flight, Ptolemy's son fell off his horse into a canal and drowned. Some accounts say that this was an accident, but others argue that it was the work of divine providence. After all, how often do you hear about kings dying right before they're about to inherit the throne? You may well refuse to associate with her, since she is the bane of our whole province and the cause of this entire war. But Caesar was smitten. He and Cleopatra spent several months together, and he even introduced her to Roman culture, having her recite poetry in the style of Homer. While Caesar had helped her regain the throne, he had also prevented her from having sole authority. She had ultimate power, but she couldn't use it. Caesar essentially acted as a military governor over Egypt. Any law he made had to be signed by Cleopatra. Even ambassadors to her court had to receive permission from the Roman Senate before speaking to her. But inside the carpet, she hid herself, and having covered her head with a basket, she sent it to Caesar. He received it, and as soon as the basket was uncovered, there stood Cleopatra. And as soon as she heard that Caesar was in town, she hatched a daring plan. Her biographer, Plutarch, tells the story like this. Maybe they thought that if they gave Caesar an impressive victim, he would see it as a sign of loyalty. See, while the cult of Isis had spread throughout the Roman world, inspiring a number of female devotees known as the Isiac Mysteries, it was unheard of for an actual Egyptian queen to identify with the goddess. Yet Caesar's propagandists wrote of Cleopatra as a living embodiment of Isis, citing her alleged wisdom, magic, and healing abilities. As well as her role as a powerful mother figure, though, they conveniently ignored the fact that Cleopatra wasn't much older than her own mother when their meeting occurred. Regardless, this propaganda worked to paint Caesar as a liberator of Egypt, freeing the true Isis from the tyranny of the usurper Ptolemy, and honor, or maybe they just wanted to get rid of the body. Whatever the reason, Caesar was not pleased. He understood that murdering a king was not the same as defeating an enemy in battle. He needed control of Alexandria, not a corpse. Amused, he reached out to try and capture it, but accidentally cut himself on the fly's sharp wings. Yes, that Pompey. The two had once been friends, but now they were bitter rivals fighting over control of the Roman world. As soon as Caesar arrived, Pompey's men opened fire on the docks, trying to kill him. But Caesar survived and retaliated, kicking off a civil war that would rage for 3 years. As blood trickled down his arm, he panicked, believing that he had been poisoned, and ordered for the fly to be brought before him. When it appeared, he noticed that its appearance was similar to a scarab beetle, an animal considered sacred by the Egyptians. Terrified that he had committed a sacrilege, he drew his sword and sliced off one of its wings, but the fly still lived. So he chopped off its other wing and legs until it finally expired. Then, realizing that he had just murdered a sacred animal, he panicked and fled to his bathroom, locked the door, and threw himself into the bathwater, drowning. You see, their father, King Ptolemy XII, had died when Cleopatra was only 14 years old. And just a year later, her mom, Queen Cleopatra VI, married Ptolemy's younger brother, which made them uncle and niece, but also husband and wife. Soon enough, the couple had a son, Ptolemy XIII, and then another son, Ptolemy XIV, who was Cleopatra's full brother and the eventual last king of Ptolemaic Egypt. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC to Ptolemy XII and Cleopatra VI. See, while Cleopatra was half-sister to Ptolemy XIII, they didn't have the same dad. Rome had helped him secure it, but now he wanted to be free of any strings attached. When Rome asked for yet another grain shipment, he refused and instead provoked them by blocking their access to the Jewish holy sites in the region of Alexandria. This caused unrest among Alexandria's Jewish community, which just so happened to be the home of Rome's future client king, Julius Caesar. But before we get ahead of ourselves again, let's go back to Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII. He was the 5th ruler in the series of Ptolemies, who reigned over Egypt from 305 to 30 BC. But he wasn't Egyptian at all. In fact, he was Greek. See, the Greek general Ptolemy I Soter was appointed satrap, aka governor of Egypt, by Alexander the Great during his campaign in 332 BC. When Alexander died in 323 BC, Ptolemy seized the chance to declare himself pharaoh, starting the Ptolemaic dynasty. During the next 2 centuries, the Ptolemaics mostly kept to themselves, but they did occasionally get into scuffles with the expanding Roman Republic. It was under Ptolemy XII's rule where those tensions really started to rise. After the death of his father, Ptolemy XI, and his own brief civil war, Ptolemy XII took the throne. It was said that Caesar came to Egypt to follow his enemy, Ptolemy, but when he arrived in 48 BC, he found that the young king was already dead. So when Caesar arrived, he was presented with the good news that Ptolemy was dead, and the bad news that his assassins were none other than his own counselors and courtiers. Now, when Caesar entered Alexandria, he was greeted by some more friendly faces, namely Pompey, his former ally and current enemy. Amidst all this turmoil, it was these counselors who presented Caesar with the dead body of Ptolemy. Not too far from the city, Cleopatra had been in exile with only a small group of loyalists and without an army or a crown. Early in the siege, Cleopatra learned that Caesar's camp was close to the harbor, and every day he used to take a bath on a boat on the sea. When Caesar saw her, he was amazed, and Cleopatra stood there calmly and said, in fact, it was around this time that Cleopatra earned her famous title of the New Isis, and so Caesar named Cleopatra and her brother co-rulers of Egypt, granting them the titles pharaoh and restored her to the royal palaces of her ancestors. The peace did not last long. You see, Ptolemy's advisors had fled to the royal palace with his young son and a small force of soldiers. During the siege, Caesar suffered wounds to the leg and torso, possibly from shrapnel after an arrow deflected off of his armor. Meanwhile, Ptolemy's forces were in full retreat, fleeing across the Nile River into the country's interior. While Ptolemy XIV's death meant that Cleopatra and Caesar could rule Egypt unopposed, she had made enemies. So while Cleopatra dressed as the goddess Isis and had statues erected of her and Caesar as divine parents, she was not happy. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. In the year 44 BC, Cleopatra ruled over Egypt. She was the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Now her son Caesarion was growing up. He was the son of Julius Caesar, who ruled Rome. Just one problem though, Caesar was dead. Now before his passing, he had made Octavian his adopted heir. But Octavian was only 19 years old, and some people believed that Caesar had actually named Caesarion, Cleopatra's son, his true heir. So Caesarion could technically claim the throne. Now, despite what the people believed, when Caesar died, Cleopatra fled back to Egypt with Caesarion and now ruled alongside him, including outlawing any mention of Caesar's name and destroying any statues that were erected in his honor. But there was still one major threat to his reign: Mark Antony. You see, when Caesar died, Mark Antony, along with Octavian and Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate. This alliance gave Antony control over the eastern part of the empire, while Octavian got the west. But even though they had defeated Caesar's assassins, there was still bad blood between Antony and Octavian. You see, when Antony learned that Octavian was coming to defeat him, he fled to Alexandria, where Cleopatra lived. Back in Rome, Cleopatra refused, knowing that if she agreed to Octavian's proposal, Caesarion would be executed, and so she began preparing for war. And it was here that he made the fatal mistake that would cost him everything. When Octavian entered the palace, he found Cleopatra lying on a golden chariot. Despite the fact that Cleopatra had resisted him every step of the way, Octavian was actually quite taken by her beauty and charm. After all, they weren't really doing anything to harm him. Well, the answer is simple. See, Octavian knew that Cleopatra and Caesarion posed a threat to his power. If the people of Rome found out that Cleopatra was more powerful than he was, then they might turn against him. And this is exactly what happened. And so he offered her a chance to save her life by surrendering. But she refused, insisting that she would rather die than live under Roman rule. Even though this was false, it didn't matter because it was these rumors that inspired the Egyptian priestess to curse Octavian, dooming his bloodline forever. This led to the fall of the Julio-Claudians and the rise of the Flavians, ending Octavian's reign and bringing an end to the Roman Empire as they knew it. As his army approached Egypt, Cleopatra and her forces were ready to meet them. Although her navy was strong, it was no match for Octavian's. We've got lots of fun stories from history's most famous figures, including Cleopatra's great-grandmother, who was also the last pharaoh of Egypt. Anyway, thanks for watching and see you next time. When Octavian learned that Caesarion was still alive, he brought him to the palace to meet him. Caesarion hoped that Octavian would take him in as a nephew and allow him to keep his fortune, but this was not the case. Instead, Octavian ordered that he too be killed. And so the last active pharaoh of Egypt lost her life. And soon he had taken control of the entire country. Cleopatra attempted to flee to India, but Octavian was hot on her trail. And soon he had cornered her in a palace in Alexandria. He declared Caesarion co-regent of Rome, giving him the title of Caesar. Not only that, but he gave Cleopatra the title of Queen of Rome as well. It was at this point that Octavian knew that he would never be able to share Rome with Cleopatra or Caesarion. And so he began making plans to invade Egypt. This, of course, included those statues that were erected in Caesarion's honor as well. And while Lepidus seemed happy with this deal, Antony and Octavian couldn't agree on who got what. Because of this, Octavian had to return to Italy and bring reinforcements. Now, Cleopatra had been watching all of this unfold from Egypt, waiting for her chance to strike. See, when Octavian first declared war on Caesar's assassins, she sent him supplies. And when he left to battle Mark Antony, she aided him once again, hoping that he would be grateful enough to leave her alone. But so far, he hadn't shown any signs of this. Eventually, Sextus Pompey was defeated, allowing Octavian to finally set sail for Greece and defeat Antony once and for all. Soon, they were at each other's throats. And when Caesar's assassins fled to Greece and Asia Minor, Antony seized the opportunity and attacked Octavian, forcing him to flee to Brundisium. There, he regrouped and set sail for Greece to confront Antony. But despite these efforts, Cleopatra refused to bend to Octavian's demands and continued to worship Caesar as a god, which earned her the hatred of the Roman Senate. While this arrangement may sound a little strange, it wasn't actually all that uncommon in ancient history for mothers to rule in place of their sons until they grew up. For example, Caesarine's great-grandmother had done the exact same thing for him when he was just a baby. Back in Rome, Caesar was becoming more and more powerful. And while most people loved him, some people feared him, believing that he wanted to be king. But Caesar insisted that he didn't want to be king. These people still didn't believe him, thinking that he was just saying that so he wouldn't arouse suspicion. You see, even though Caesar was dead, his will still had to be read. And when it was Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, was granted the title of Augustus, making him the first official emperor of Rome. Not only that, but Cleopatra's son, Caesarion, was also given a noble title, being called Caesar by his subjects. And so Cleopatra continued to rule alongside him, hoping that one day he would grow up to inherit both Rome and Egypt. But until then, she would have to protect him from his other uncle, Octavian, who she knew would stop at nothing to destroy her. So instead, they decided to get rid of him. On the Ides of March, Caesar entered the Senate, where he would be surrounded by his enemies and stabbed many times. But before we continue with the story, let's just take a quick moment to appreciate the sponsor of today's video. Cleopatra was far away in Egypt, but she still heard the news. Many people were shocked by Caesar's passing, including his close friend and ally, Cicero. The Roman statesman was afraid that Rome was descending into chaos and lawlessness, and warned against the increasing influence of Antony, who was now one of Caesar's 3 heirs along with Octavian and Lepidus. Thank you. And now, let's get back to the video. Julius Caesar was dead and Rome was in shock. Now, Cleopatra had been silent following Caesar's death because she knew that she needed to bide her time. As Octavian consolidated his power in Rome, he did everything he could to erase Caesar's memory. Soon after taking power, Octavian declared war on Caesar's assassins, eventually defeating them and sending them fleeing. When Caesar's will was read, it was decided that Lepidus would be given Gaul, Spain, and the provinces of Cisalpine and Narbonese. It was during this battle that Octavian's fleet came under attack by Sextus Pompey, who was Caesar's son-in-law and one of Caesar's assassins. After winning the battle, Octavian returned to Rome, where he was greeted like a god. And so Cleopatra decided to take matters into her own hands. But before he did this, he sent word to Cleopatra, demanding that she surrender and leave with him. Meanwhile, Octavian landed his troops in northern Africa and began marching south. She offered no resistance and surrendered without a fight. Realizing that she was determined to resist, Octavian ordered that she be killed. And so her life came to an end on August 1230 BC. You might be wondering why Octavian hated Cleopatra and Caesarion so much. You see, when Cleopatra died, rumors spread throughout the empire that Octavian had poisoned her. If you enjoyed this episode with the misadventures of Cleopatra and Caesarion, make sure to check out more content. When Caesar died, Rome was broken. 2 men wanted power. There was Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, and there was Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man. It had gold-leaf towers. It had gardens and fountains, but Cleopatra wasn't there. A group of priests met Antony. They told him that their goddess would meet him soon. Then they led him into a big room. The walls were decorated with gold. The floor was made of pure gold. There were tall palm trees and small orange trees, and there were pools of water everywhere. The air was filled with perfume. Antony smelled it, but he couldn't tell what it was. "What is that smell?" he asked. "That is my special perfume," Cleopatra said. As his ship sailed away, he saw Cleopatra on the shore. She waved to him. Then she turned around and walked away. Back in Rome, people whispered about Cleopatra. Some said she was a witch. He was making decisions. He was talking with ambassadors. He was preparing for war. Rome was about to go to war with the East. And Antony knew that if he wanted to win the war, he would need Cleopatra's help. Others said she was a goddess. But Antony didn't care what they said. He only cared about getting better. She had grown thin. She hadn't left the palace in weeks. "Cleopatra," he said, and he hugged her. She hugged him back. Then she led him to the palace. She poured some on her wrist. "Do you like it?" He looked into her eyes. "I am ready," he said. They talked about the war, about the future, about their love. They said he spent too much money on the war, but as they prepared, their relationship changed. They argued more. They worked hard, but they didn't enjoy themselves. They knew that soon they would have to fight Octavian and his army. They knew that many would die. They knew that they might lose. They said he was bringing Egypt into Rome. Octavian used this. He spread fear. He said Cleopatra wanted to take Rome's throne. The people listened. They chose Octavian. War was near. Soon they would sail to Rome. They would fight Octavian. They would fight for love. They would fight for Egypt. They would fight for Rome. They would fight for power. But as the days passed, Antony started to change. He drank too much wine. He fought with friends. He argued with generals. Cleopatra didn't like it. She knew that Antony was stressed, but she also knew that he was forgetting Rome. "It smells like heaven," he said. She smiled. He was so handsome, so brave, so different from the men in Egypt. And in the middle of the room sat a golden throne. Antony couldn't help but tap his foot to the beat. He is coming to Egypt. Cleopatra and Antony looked at each other. It was time to fight. Soon, Cleopatra and Mark Antony were dancing. They danced under the stars. They drank wine. They ate fruit. And they talked about everything and nothing. For 2 weeks, Antony lived in Cleopatra's palace. She wrote that she missed him, but she hoped he would get better soon. She didn't say a word about coming to Rome. She didn't say a word about Egypt. All she said was that she missed him. Antony felt better after reading the letter. Maybe it was the words. Maybe it was just the ink. But Antony felt better. He rode elephants. He raced chariots. He hunted birds. He did things he never dreamed possible. And all the time, Cleopatra was there to teach him, to guide him, to show him the wonders of Egypt. Antony waited. He was nervous. What would Cleopatra look like? How would she act? Would she help him? He tried to stand up, but he couldn't. He called for Cleopatra. She rushed to his side. "What is wrong?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "My head hurts. I feel sick." She knew what it was. She had seen it before. "You have the Egyptian fever," she said. "Don't worry," she said. "I will find a cure." But deep down, she knew that there was no cure. If Antony wanted to live, he had to leave Egypt. Antony came east. He needed support. He wanted Egypt. And then she appeared. She came through a big archway. She was wearing a golden dress. It sparkled and shone. When Cleopatra entered the room, everyone clapped. They shouted, "Cleopatra, we hail thee as our queen." Antony was shocked. He thought Cleopatra would help him. He didn't think that she wanted to be a queen. "Why do you call her your queen?" he asked. "She is our queen because she is the new Isis," said one of the priests. "Isis?" asked Antony. "She is the most powerful goddess in Egypt," said the priest. "Her power is unmatched." Cleopatra smiled. "Come," she said. "Let us go to my garden." Antony followed her out of the palace, and on her head was a golden crown. It had real diamonds. She walked slowly to Antony. Everyone watched. No one dared to move. Finally, she stopped in front of Antony. She looked at him, then she smiled. "Who are you?" she asked. "I am Mark Antony, a friend of Caesar," he said. "You have come far," she replied. "I have come for your help," he said. "I want to rule Rome." She took his hand. "You can count on me," she said, and Antony knew that he had found an ally. So he sent word to Cleopatra, the most powerful woman in the East. She was rich, she was smart, she was beautiful. She was dangerous, and Antony thought she could help him get more powerful. Cleopatra arrived by boat. Her ship was huge. It was like a floating palace. Then he heard music. It was like nothing he had ever heard before. It was loud and powerful. But he hadn't known the half of it. They walked through the gardens. Flowers were everywhere. There were all kinds of trees. Then they saw musicians. They played loud, lively music. Then one day, Antony woke up. He felt strange. His head hurt. The next day, Antony got on his ship. He sailed away from Egypt. He was sad to leave Cleopatra, but he didn't want to die. For months, Antony stayed in bed. He was too sick to get up. One day, he got a letter. It was from Cleopatra. As the days passed, he started to walk. He started to talk. He started to work. Soon, he was back in the Senate. One night, Antony got on a ship. He sailed to Alexandria. When he arrived, Cleopatra was waiting for him. The next day, they talked. Meanwhile, back in Rome, people grew angry. They said Cleopatra was controlling Antony. They said he had forgotten Rome. Cleopatra and Antony prepared. They built ships. They trained soldiers. They got supplies. They knew what was coming. They were ready to fight. Then one day, a messenger arrived. He brought news from Rome. Octavian has declared war, he said. The next day, Cleopatra and Antony stood on the shore. Their army was ready. Their ships were ready. "Are you ready?" Cleopatra asked. Antony took her hand. "This is the last queen of Egypt. This is how she fell." The year before, Cleopatra and Antony had gone to war. They fought Octavian, who was later known as Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. When Antony returned, he thought Cleopatra had betrayed him. He drew his sword and charged into her palace. There, he found her by the altar, a small fire sputtering in front of her. Her hand was raised as if she was praying. Her armies were defeated. Her lover was dead. There was no hope of saving Egypt. So she sent word to Octavian, agreeing to surrender, agreeing to let him take the city. Some say she was born in 69 BC, which would make her around 39 years old when she died. Others say she was born in 66, making her around 42. Still others say she was born even later, in 64. She was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek dynasty that ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great's empire fell apart. We do not know much about the other Cleopatras, but we know everything about her, or so we think. That's because she lived in the era of the Roman Empire. She traveled to Rome. She visited Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. She bore children to both of them. She attended parties hosted by powerful Roman senators. Some belonged to Cleopatra's family, including her father and her sister. She was still wearing her crown. To remove it would be to desecrate her remains. She had chosen to die in her finery, and they respected that choice. Outside, Octavian would establish the city of Alexandria. As Rome's main city in the east, it thrived for centuries. But Cleopatra never saw any of it. She died before it happened. She never saw the pyramids restored. She never saw Alexandria become a great city. Instead, she became a legend, the last queen of Egypt, the woman who chose death over surrender. Others were ordinary folk, people who held no special rank. They were buried alongside royalty, perhaps because they were loyal servants. Cleopatra's mummy was never found. They did not find her bones, but they did find her tomb. Unlike her predecessors, Cleopatra was well known outside Egypt. She learned languages, including Egyptian, and she used these skills to build relationships. She befriended Rome, securing her position on the throne, but she ended up losing it. According to Plutarch, the last pharaohs of Egypt were Macedonian, Greek, not Egyptian. Perhaps she was tired of running, tired of hiding. Perhaps she simply felt that her life was forfeit. Whatever the reason, she chose to die that way. Some say she died by poison, ingesting a deadly concoction. Others say she allowed an Egyptian cobra to bite her. Either way, she died alone, alone in her room, alone in her finery. Ptolemy I, founder of the dynasty, was the first king. He ruled until 283 BC. After him, there were many more, each with a Greek name, Ptolemy II, Ptolemy III, and so on. Cleopatra VII, the last of the line, was half Egyptian, her mother being Cleopatra, but she grew up speaking Greek. If that's true, she would have been anywhere between 44 and 47 when she died. We don't know exactly how old she was because nobody knows exactly when Cleopatra was born, but we do know this, that when she died a queen. Whether or not that note existed, whether or not it was delivered to Octavian, we can only wonder. What we do know is that when her servants realized that she had died, they quickly moved her body into her tomb. They had to hurry because Octavian's men would be back, combing through the city once more, searching for the queen. He accepted, and soon enough, Octavian rode into Alexandria, riding on the shoulders of his men, cheering loudly. They had survived Octavian's purge. They led her to her dressing table, and here, looking at her reflection, she decided how she would die. She chose to die like a queen, to die in her finery, and so her servants helped her dress in fine linen and fine perfume. They placed her crown on her head, the crown of Egypt. Then she lay down on a golden couch, ready to die. Around him, his soldiers shouted, "Cleopatra, Cleopatra." They wanted to tear down the Egyptian queen, but she was nowhere to be seen. They ransacked the city, pillaging the riches that Cleopatra had amassed. But she was nowhere to be found. Octavian went to her palace, but it was empty. No queen, but he did find Caesarion. He was taken before Octavian, kneeling before the new master of Egypt. The young prince was killed. Soon, all of Egypt would be under the rule of Rome. Around her were scattered the bodies of her ladies in waiting, all of them stabbed to death by Antony's soldiers. For weeks, Octavian searched for her, searching every corner of the palace complex, but he never found her. He wanted her as a trophy, wanted to parade her through the streets of Rome, but she was nowhere to be found. And finally, he gave up. He left the city, leaving behind the task of ruling Egypt to his deputies. And in the middle of the night, Cleopatra left her hiding place. The queen was unharmed. She simply stepped out from behind the altar and embraced Antony, embracing the man who had come to kill her. But this wasn't just a land war, it was also a battle at sea. Their combined fleet was over 200 ships strong, but theirs was not an invincible navy. In that moment, Antony knew what he had done. He fell to his knees and begged for forgiveness. Cleopatra forgave him. Together, they escaped to her private chambers, where her son Caesarion waited for her. Alone in a room, he had been told to stay hidden. Now, reunited, they escaped to the royal palace, riding in the back of a golden chariot. Hand in hand, they would rule Egypt together. They shared power, sharing the throne. But outside, Octavian was coming closer. His spies reported that Antony had died. It was false, but when messengers arrived to confirm it, Cleopatra refused to believe them. She only believed her own eyes. So she had them put to death. There was a problem with the winds. They were supposed to meet their allies, but without the right winds, they could not get there in time. They said they brought news from Antony, news about their future, about a future together, a future that didn't exist. You see, when the messengers had arrived and told Antony that Cleopatra was dead, he had been devastated. He fell onto his sword, but that did not kill him. He was pulled out of the water, saved by his armor. Bleeding and dying, he made it back to shore. He was carried back to his tent where he awaited the arrival of Cleopatra. She never came. Days passed, then weeks. At some point, he learned that the messenger who had told him of Cleopatra's death was lying. And when he learned that she was alive, he regretted killing himself. But it was too late. He was dead. And so Cleopatra sailed away alone and early. Antony followed. They lost the battle and both fled back to Egypt. Antony looked down at her and saw a black mark on his general's arm. He washed it off with water. It was ink, a tattoo. But then, one evening, 2 senators came to see her. Cleopatra spent her last days giving orders, getting ready for Octavian. Cleopatra's forces had surrendered the city, but the queen was missing. We do not know exactly how old Cleopatra was when she died. Ancient sources are not quite sure. When Cleopatra emerged from her hiding hole, she was met by her servants. Around her were statues of her ancestors, kings and queens of Egypt. In the annals of Egypt, Cleopatra VII is the greatest. It's hard to say why Cleopatra chose to die that day. Some people say she wrote a note, a letter to Octavian, saying something along the lines of, "You win, but remember, I was the queen of Egypt." Her tomb was found in 1998. Archaeologists discovered it thanks to modern technology, thanks to ground-penetrating radar. Inside, they found mummies, 16 mummies. And now, almost 2,000 years later, we know how she died. A servant entered the room and found her lifeless. When we think of Cleopatra, we think of an Egyptian queen. A queen with a tragic love life. A queen who chose her own end. A legendary queen, but where did that legend begin? Let's go back in time to find out. It's the year 30 BC, Cleopatra is gone. Her story did not end with her life. It began with her legend. The year before, she had lost her battle against Octavian, who would later become Rome's first emperor. Egypt had lost its war against Rome and so became part of the Roman Empire. Cleopatra's younger brother, Caesarion, who is also her son, was killed. There was no heir. The line of pharaohs had ended, but Cleopatra's name lived on. In books, paintings, and the memories of those who had loved her or feared her or admired her from afar. She was called beautiful, feared, admired, but always remembered. Now, her memory was a bit of a problem for Octavian. She had chosen her own end, a quick death by a venomous snake bite, rather than a slow death by the hands of Octavian. People remembered that. People remembered a queen who had ruled and fallen, but never surrendered. So even in defeat, Cleopatra was a legend, and legends never die. Not in books or paintings or in the memories of men. He wanted to be known as the great emperor who had defeated Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen. But people remembered her as more than just a queen. They remembered her as a legend. To get rid of that legend, Octavian tried to erase her from history. He took her treasure. He took her palaces. He even took her library, the biggest in the ancient world. And he built a new city on the shores of the Nile. He named it Alexandria. And in that city, he put a statue of himself. And on that statue, he put the inscription, "I came, I saw, I conquered." But the legend wouldn't be erased. Cleopatra had been a legendary queen. She had ruled like a god over her people. This has been Yawn and Learn. If you want to know more about legendary people and places, subscribe to our channel. We'll send you one timeless story every week. Also, if you have a favorite historical figure, let us know in the comments below. We'll make sure to send you more of their stories.